two main points I want to sort of still make is, what about predictability? I told you that causal structure analysis distinguishes clearly between causation and predictability once you characterize causation properly. What about short-term predictability and free will, which is a scenario in which indeterminism probably doesn't play a big role? You are in a closed room with a computer screen performing a task of judging, for instance, somebody or something out of your own free will for a minute, and it's relatively predictable. Indeterminism should not be very important. Now, of course, we know that in a situation like this, that comes up in such discussion, it is of course true that somebody who knew me very well might indeed figure out what I'm going to do, predict what I'm going to do. And in this case, this is not at all a problem for free will, this high-level predictability, because the person who knows me very well essentially knows or has incorporated in her own mind my reasons. And therefore, because she knows my reasons, she can also predict what my reasons will cause and what my decision will cause. So she better be able to predict high level what I do, because it is due to my reasons. Those are the true causes. More interestingly is the case of low-level predictability that we saw sort of before. And I'm using here as the only reference to this group. Imagine you're closed in your room, you're going through the donation paradigm, and you slowly decide based on your own free will in a deliberative setting to whom you want to donate the money, okay? And you just do it. Now imagine again, we're certainly far from there. This is the Blue Brain Project supercomputer, that we're able to know everything about your neurons, how they are connected and what state they are in. And at least for a short time, it should be able to predict pretty well exactly what you're going to do. There's no reason why not. And it's going to do it indeed, potentially faster than you do it, giving you the sense of alienation. It just got everything I did. So what am I doing here? So that's all understandable. But if IIT is right, this is absolutely not a problem for free will. A substrate that the computer is using is a shortcut. What you really can do if it is a good substrate is unfold it, find out what exists, the experience, and account for all the properties of the experience, which is the goal of IIT, as well as for what causes between two different experiences, for instance. Which is a gigantic effort, of course. The poor computer wouldn't be able to do it. It's an impossible task. But leaving that aside, we can, however, take a shortcut. We don't care to figure out what exists and what causes truly, but we can just check unit by unit what's going to happen next to that unit, to each neuron, say, will it fire or not? And so we get a prediction. If the model of what exists and causes is good, the prediction should be good, but prediction is not causation. And my last point will be this. So what does this entail with respect to now the longer term story of historical determination, this feeling that we often have that no matter what, sort of we are determined by what happens to our genes, to our environment, to our life experiences, and so on and so forth, okay? And where does personal responsibility then come into this picture? So here I give, just again as an illustration, a view that some people certainly hold, which is obviously discouraging, in which from the Big Bang on, so to speak, it's just one damn thing after another. This determines this, which determines that, which determines that. There may be some indeterminism here and there, but essentially, inevitably, what follows what was before in a way that could be predicted, for instance, to some extent. In any case, it's a long chain of determinations. And therefore, in this view, in some sense, nothing is ever truly my responsibility, but is determined by previous occurrences and, to some extent, chance. Now, I'm sure you have discussed this at length, and there are ways to sort of think about this, but for sure, it's a lingering thought. What does IIT have to say? It has to say that the story is radically different. The intrinsic existence view says that my decisions are truly my responsibility, and increasingly so with self-forming actions and rationality. And just I illustrate this by saying that what truly exists, again, according to IIT, is not the substrate. At first, it's just this what I call dust, possibly many, many micro entities with minimal values of phi's that count for nothing, okay? That's the universe at the beginning. Then consciousness, this is the first big discontinuity, emergence at a high level. And here I mean emergence just in the temporal sense. Suddenly there is some big entity, like this primitive fish or primitive mammal, where there is true existence. And a baby, of course, would be possibly even more true existence. So there is consciousness, something exists rather than nothing, and exists a lot as measured by phi. The second big discontinuity is when at a certain age, it's typically a gradual process, you actually have contents within consciousness, substructures in the cause-effect structure, corresponding to alternatives, reasons, and therefore, willed decisions. Then, for the first time, you truly have free will. This free will is there, so you are, by the account I gave you, acting on your own free will. Now or later, it's your decision, but it's still largely devoid of responsibility. The free will acts on something that was largely determined by what happened before, so to speak. It's then when you begin to have self-forming actions, I don't mean strictly in the sense of Cain, but more, going back to Aristotle, if you wish, in which you decide that you want to learn medicine because you want to help the world and help other people. Okay, you do that. Of course, you're going to change all kinds of things, including things in your brain. You're going to change the substrate and therefore change what exists. And the more this accrues, the more of your own free will, your responsibility increases because you are a consequence, an effect of your free will. And when you're an adult doctor, for instance, then not only do you have high phi and a high level of consciousness and all the reasons and the beliefs and the understanding that you have, with it comes high responsibility because now you have been responsible for who you are. And finally, to me, the last discontinuity is the one in which when you also get hold of rationality as a method, the method to examine your reasons and beliefs in an impartial manner, of course, aided by a society and by science, as opposed to as what was determined by your past, you really become fully and truly free, and you really become truly and fully responsible. So I will end, I promise, now this is the end, by saying these are lots of words you wish, lots of issues, but it is still a research program and it is open to empirical tests. So what we are trying to do is use animates, these little things where we can actually measure everything accurately, animates interacting with an environment, to just measure these things, what exists and what causes. Of course, these animals don't have reasons and they don't have beliefs, but one day they might get there. But ultimately, what can, I think, in principle be done is, in terms of human experiments, ask the kind of question you have been asking, about involuntary and voluntary actions, small and big decisions that I call them, Libet style, trivial, if you wish, or arbitrary, and deliberate decisions, and look indeed at the brain. And in essence, whether it's a reflex or a TMS-induced movement or an trivial decision or a deliberation, the questions become, in principle, tractable. If this, say, were the main complex, the overall substrate of consciousness which unfolded corresponds to what you experience, including when you are making a decision, can we identify the tentative borders of this main complex, as we tried to do, as I showed you before, when we are leading up to a reflex or a Libet style or a deliberate action and measuring its phi and its borders? Once we have its borders, is it the case that voluntary actions, as IIT would predict, but not reflex actions, originate within the main complex, that is the part that's conscious? And we should be able to measure the alpha, the value of actual causation, between, for instance, motor cortex and the main complex compared to elsewhere. Can we backtrack in time the actual cause of a voluntary action, the distal cause where the buck stops, so to speak, the decision? And that's, again, is made precise in principle by the causal structure analysis. And finally, is it the case that alpha, as we would predict, is higher and the substrate within the main complex is larger when you are making a deliberate decision, triggering a deliberate action versus a Libet style action? So I'll end there and thank my collaborators for free will, especially Larissa Albantakis, Melanie Bolli, Chiara Cirelli, Matteo Grasso, Billy Marshall, and Christoph Koch. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Giulio. This has been really thought-provoking and intriguing. I feel that every 2-3 slides would have merited a discussion of several meetings even. So first of all, thank you again very much. And I really wonder what our philosophers have to say about these ideas. I see one question in the chat, but maybe others would probably have questions as well. I just wanted to have a first question to make sure I understood correctly that we are all on the same page. So when you say that only what exists can cause, you mean exists for me, exists intrinsically. And this is like the critical point of your argument, I think, is that the reason why we deny free will is that we look at the system extrinsically. And then we look at these vertical causation and so on and so forth. But from your perspective, the only thing that matters is what exists for me in my consciousness. And that's the realm where you examine causation. Did I get it right?
Yes, you did. But an important thing I want to, thanks for putting it like that, okay? It's clearly the critical point with respect to free will and many other things, including meaning, of course. But what I want to convey with these two slides, the intrinsic existence view and the extrinsic existence view, okay, which is this, okay? Let me start again with the extrinsic existence view. This is the one we take as people. I'm looking at the glass on my table and the mouse on my computer and so on and so forth. And operationally, I see that it is physical. I can take and make a difference. Okay, that's the criterion for physical existence. Otherwise, if you cannot prove that a Higgs boson takes and makes a difference, your colleagues will not believe it truly exists, okay? But that's the extrinsic view. And this can be applied to anything that takes and makes a difference. In the case of the brain, it's easy. You can ask the body plus our tools for people who think about extended cognition. You can talk about the entire brain or just the cortex or just the posterior cortex, as I say here, or just one area. You can do whatever you want, and you can do it at whatever grain. Those are all legitimate. They're absolutely fine, okay? And some of these things we can study extrinsically. I call them, this is a whole other story, extrinsic entities. They hold together well. They're actually very integrated. They are also local maxima, meaning most subsets and supersets are less integrated. A body is like that. My body is pretty well integrated. It's sort of the paradigmatic organism, okay? And it holds together well. But if IIT is right, it's not a global maximum. It doesn't satisfy all the postulates until the very end. So the key thing that IIT says is it's fine to analyze, or even in real life or in science, anything you can observe and manipulate and say it exists, of course, okay? But this is from the perspective of a conscious observer, extrinsically. The claim is that consciousness, which exists truly, and by that I mean the Cartesian insight, that is nothing else, okay? Immediately and indubitably, and it is from within consciousness that we can then postulate all these reasonable things. There is stuff apart from me, that stuff is physical and maybe atomic, but consciousness is the only thing that is the proof that there is something rather than nothing, that something has these 5 properties of existence. And so the idea is that even in physical terms, consciousness tells us what it takes for something to truly exist, where to truly exist means to exist intrinsically. You must be able to exist for yourself as a, structure, specific, unitary, and definite entity. Without that, it doesn't make sense. You don't exist. If I am on my bed, I am awake, I see my body, as I showed you many times, and then suddenly I fall into deep sleep, okay? From the extrinsic perspective of somebody looking at me, I'm there just as much. From the intrinsic perspective, nothing exists as far as I'm concerned. I'm gone. From the outside, it's basically the same, almost the same. But the outside is always some conscious subject, by the way. From the inside, there is nothing. And I think we all understand that if you don't have consciousness, nothing truly exists as far as each of us is concerned. So there is a direct sense in which we know that that's the only existence that matters. The only, I call it existence worth having, or the only kind of entity worth being, okay? That's how I would put it. That is what truly exists. Interestingly, this is a thing that can be tested scientifically. We can check whether indeed consciousness is this maximum or cause-effect power. If that turns out to be true, then its metaphysical consequences have to be taken seriously, in fact, scientifically. And one of the consequences is this intrinsic view, that then we should consider the substate not at any level we want, we can still do that, like in this view, or any substate we want, but really ultimately it condenses down into a bunch of things that truly exist intrinsically for themselves, plus their extrinsic interactions at one particular grain. It's a radically different view, if you wish, of what is out there.
Yeah. Okay,
But
thank
it's
you.
a view that
Sorry.
is testable and consistent with science. So I'll stop, but thanks for the question.